So we're right about at the top of the hour. So thanks for everyone that's joining us. So this is Blake out of North Carolina, CMX Connect. We connect community professionals from all over the world. And then, so we're just getting people joining in. And then for today, we're kind of looking at doing basically more content, ways to connect people with people working in the DevRel space. So it's an emerging space. So people have a lot of questions and everyone kind of ends up there in different ways. And so just already talked to Jeremy here and there, and he's make sure I get your title right. Jeremy's a Senior Developer Evangelist at Pluralsight. So I'll put a link to that into the chat. And so I thought, Jeremy does a lot of interest, amazing background from all that stuff. So I was like, this would be a really great person, because not only as a developer evangelist, where sometimes it can skew a little bit marketing, and other times you get almost like where somebody's actually walked the walk on the developer side. So just a really amazing, interesting background. So I thought getting Jeremy on, where we could do like a quick fireside chat, get some of your questions, and you can really see a developer, someone really out there that's kind of also turned into this role, and then kind of finding out a little bit about what what you're currently doing at Pluralsight. So if you're new to the chat today, just let us know where you're attending from around the world. I see Jay from Boston area. My Boston accent is off today, so I'm not even going to try. Some other people in there, but wherever you are, let us know where you are. I'm just in North Carolina. And Jeremy, I believe you're out of the West Coast on the Oregon side, right?
Yep, just outside of Portland.
Nice. And we got Erica from Mexico City, and some people from all over the place. So we will just kick it off. Cool. So with that all stuff out of the way, be sure to go to events.cmxhub.com for all the cool CMX Connect stuff. We'll do a post-event survey. So Beth always tells me that over this, like, make sure to tell people there's a survey after us. Let us know how we're doing. Throw stuff at us. But just kind of be warned, you're probably throwing stuff at your monitor. But without further ado, we've got our very special guest, Jeremy Morgan, today. I'll put a link to his LinkedIn, all that great stuff. So just to kind of set the stage, Jeremy, if you want to tell people a little about who you are and your background and what you're working on today.
Sure. At first, I'd like to say thanks for having me. This is very new to me because usually I'm the host talking to somebody. So I was like, oh, this is cool. I'll be on the other side of the chair for a little bit. That's awesome. But my name is Jeremy Morgan, and I'm on a mission to help developers get better, is what I generally say is my one-liner, And I'm a Senior Developer Evangelist at Pluralsight, which is a kind of a new position. So I recently was moved into this position. However, I've been doing it for a couple of years in some form, and it's kind of evolved. And before that, I was a software engineer, DevOps engineer, architect, all kinds of really geeky, techie stuff. So I started out, writing code and plugging in network cables, and I did that for years and years and years. And now I'm a developer evangelist. It's kind of evolved, and I'll kind of get into that. But yeah, it's basically a thing I could kind of go back and say, so I was a developer, and I started becoming an author for Pluralsight in 2015 and started writing courses for them on IES and DevOps and things like that, and was really excited about just teaching things and doing that part of it, and was very happy being an engineer during the day and building courses at night. And then this opportunity came across at Pluralsight, and it was as a technical marketing manager, which is kind of the name didn't really make sense at the time, but and I strongly considered it mostly because of how Pluralsight had treated me as an author. So I kind of already had, this rare opportunity where you apply for a job and you already know what the company's like. This never really happened to me before, but I already knew like their culture. I knew how they treated people. So I strongly considered that position when it came up, and I started it as a technical marketing manager. It wasn't very clearly defined, other than, we want to connect with developers better. So in a way, it was a developer advocate type role to start with. And what it was we want you to go through these marketing materials, make sure that we're saying the right things, make sure it's accurate, of course, and then, start working with the content and seeing what developers want. What do they actually want to hear from us? They don't want to hear a sales pitch. They know that we're an IT company that builds, skills, and we do all these things. We don't want it to be a sales pitch. And so started really working with content, going out and writing articles, working with sales materials, presentations, things like that. And it just kind of evolved into where, so earlier this year, the VP that I reported to, she's very, very visionary, very smart, and really in tune with tech. And she was like, I think that we need to evolve this into actual developer advocacy, developer evangelist type role. We want you to take it on, and we're going to bring in other people, and we're going to tackle this head on. And so that was at the beginning of this year, and we're off and rolling, and it's been a ton of fun. I know everybody says, I love my job and it's great, but I'm really having a lot of fun. And there's many days that I'm paid for this. So,
Nice.
which is always a good feeling to have at a job, right?
Yeah, it's really great. And kind of brings to the question of but how did all this get started? Because going back in our experience, a lot of people you're working in tech, why are you doing stuff like that? So what were kind of your the early sort of things that got you into kind of the tech world or developer world? Were you doing stuff on the side? When did you know this is a career journey that you wanted to go off on?
So developer relations was never a career journey destination that I'd ever planned on.
Right.
And I don't know if I should say that out loud, but
right.
but it's a perfect fit now. But
right.
It wasn't something that I was like, I want to be a developer advocate, and here's the steps I'm going to take. So for me, I've been into tech since I was a little kid, and I was exposed to it a lot. They talk about, in Outliers, they talk about how Bill Gates and some of these people had access to computers and technology that helped them. And so I was one of those people. I had this little computer on the desk. I was probably 11 or 12 years old, and my mom was an accountant and bookkeeper. She had the computer there, and I was like, I want to touch it. I want to, I was just drawn to this thing. And she's like, no, that's for work. Don't mess with it. Eventually she's like, okay, I guess you can do some things on it. And to give away my age a little bit, this is in the 80s. And we didn't have a lot of computers at school. I think we had 2 old Commodores or something that I played with, but I really started to get into it. My uncle worked for IBM as an engineer, and he would come over and I would ask him questions and, how do I set this up? I need to put in this modem thing so I can connect other people, and kind of guided me along. And then at some point, I talked with him years later about this, and he's like, at some point I came over there and you stopped asking me questions and you started showing me things. And he goes, at that point, I knew that you were a geek for life and there's nothing we could do about it. He's like, there was no more questions. There was more look at this cool thing I did or made. And so yeah, I've always been into technology. And so I went to school for it. I started out in tech support, a lot of people do. And I went to school for networking, and it was more of a computer networking and business type of degree. So it wasn't a computer science degree. And at that time I thought, I'm going to go be a network administrator. I'm going to be a network architect someday once I learn what I'm doing, and I'm going to build these gigantic network systems. And then I strayed off the course and became a developer very shortly after that, and started writing software. But one thing that has always been something that I really enjoy doing is teaching. And I didn't even realize it until one of my professors at school, Dr. Boyd, he was somebody that I really respected, really smart, really awesome guy. And he pulled me aside after graduation, and I was like, we were talking about angles, and he'd talk to everybody in class, you've got to have some kind of angle, you've got to have some kind of thing that differentiates you from everybody else. And And I told him, like, I still don't know what my angle is. I go, I think maybe I'm going to be a Linux person, because, you know, Linux at the time was not as anywhere near as popular as it is now, but it was in networks, you know, and it was in data centers, and I knew it really well. And I'm like, I think I'm just going to be this Linux person, you know, and that's going to be my angle. And he just told me, he goes, no, your angle is going to be teaching. And at that time, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, what do you mean? I'm a quiet guy. I'm shy, you know. And he's like, no. He goes, you're gonna be a teacher, and I'll tell you why. He goes, because I see you in the class, and I know you're a quiet guy. He said, but every time you figure something out, he goes, the first thing you do is run to all the other students and tell them about it. And he's like, that, you know, that is a teacher. And you know, I was kind of looking at like, okay, I'm shy. I kind of stutter. I don't like being the center of attention, and I don't know anything. So at that time I was like, teacher, no way, this guy's crazy. And then later on, I kind of figured out that his wisdom kind of shone through years later, where I'm like, yeah, I do like that. Like, the first thing I want to do when I figure out a problem, instead of kind of keeping it to my vest and being like, yeah, I'm the person that knows whatever, my natural instinct is to be like, I want everybody else on the team to know this. And I want anybody who wants to know this, and it's just something that kind of comes from there. And so that's how I think it evolved into this. Is, you know, that was one of the reasons I wanted to do courses for Pluralsight. I was really drawn in by, you know, these different instructors, Alan and Deborah Carrata, and all these people that had helped me through my career. I just wanted to be a part of that. And I'm like, thinking, you know, I don't care how much money it makes. You know, I do great at my job. I don't care about the fame and fortune, but I think it would be really cool to build stuff that will help people, especially with IAS, which ended up being my specialty, which is a frustrating beast that is like, I basically took all of my frustration over a couple of years of working with IAS and turned them into a set of 4 courses. So yeah, it's basically the teaching thing is what brought me to the developer relations. The first time I'd ever heard of developer relations was James Montemagno. I hope I'm saying his name right. He's with Microsoft. And at the time, he was with Xamarin before Microsoft acquired Xamarin. And he was the first developer advocate that I really ever met at a, I think it was a .NET Rocks event or some kind of event. He gave a talk, showed everybody how to use Xamarin, and I pulled him aside and started talking back and forth. He's like, I'm a developer advocate. And I'm like, I have no idea what that is. Like, what does that even mean? Like, what are you talking about? You know, I just thought he was an engineer that they pulled out of there. And he's like, oh, no, I'm an engineer, but I'm doing this now. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Like, I can't believe you get paid to do that. That's awesome. And then I didn't think about it for years after that. You know, I just thought, well, that's kind of cool that they have that. And then there's people like Scott Hanselman from Microsoft who I know he lives close to me, and we had a talk, and he's the one that kind of inspired me to go to Pluralsight. He's like, just get a camera and get a microphone, and he's like, just put it out there, even if it sucks, just start making stuff. Even if it sucks, just make it and do it. And he kind of inspired me, and like a year later, I finally got good enough to submit something. So yeah, that's a long, drawn-out story. Basically, I've been involved with tech my whole life. I love tech, eat, sleep, and breathe it. But I also love teaching, and just can't get that out of my system, the teaching part of it.
Nice. And so essentially, you know, you started out the career journey. It makes the pivot to being a developer, but then you spent like where you've worn that hat and been in these different roles. So you've got that sort of going for you. And then you also love to teach. And so now it's like almost come like full circle where you get to do the best of that plus with the best of the teaching into a role working for an audience where you've walked in their shoes. So you kind of like where a lot of us haven't. And so now you can really put that rubber to the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think is really important for dev relations folks. Is to think about the problems first and think about what makes you sweat and what makes you frustrated. So there's 2 different approaches. Like, say you're a developer relations person and you want to teach someone React. there's two different approaches. You can go and read through all the documentation. You can pull out some of the things, because nobody wants to read documentation, right? I mean, Pluralsight wouldn't exist if you could just read documentation and know React and build React applications. Nobody wants to do that. So you could go and read through the documentation and pick out, say, these are the things that are important from this, and I'll present a different version of the documentation just with the things that are important. And that works very well. You can actually do that. I have seen that style employed very well. But another way that you can do it, the way I prefer to do it, is I will go through the documentation. I will start building something. I'll just make up a project in my head, like I'm going to build, a customer management system. And then every time I get stuck on something, which even after 20 years, I get stuck on something, and I like to reiterate that as much as possible, that even after 20 years of doing this, I get stuck on things. And that's where I start to pick up and take note. I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense. I don't know how this updates the page. This makes no sense. I make it work, and then it's like, that proverbial it works and I don't know why type of thing, or doesn't work and I don't know why. So I just try to figure out, okay, what is it that I stumbled on? What did I struggle with? And then as soon as I figure it out, however long that takes, that's what I try to put into the content and say, okay, this part's going to hang you up and this is going to be confusing. I think of something like with Go runes, for me, when I first started learning Go, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. What on earth is this? Why did they do this? This seems so silly and stupid. And then once I figured it out, I'm like, okay, this is the first thing I'm going to teach people, because if I got hung up on this, other people are going to get hung up on it. And developer relations folks, that's the best thing to do, is just acknowledge your frustration and then use that as the point to move from when you're creating things.
It was kind of interesting with a lot of the teams that I talked to. So you mentioned start with the problem. And so a lot of times what I find is people go like, okay, what swag are we going to give away and how are we going to market to them? And then it's like, oh, by the way, who are you? And why aren't you reading my email? And so that's generally the complete opposite. So from your perspective, one of the building blocks is start with the problem. What are some of those other things doing? Because with so many going out on those two tracks, where do you see no, if you had to tell someone this is what you should be focused on first?
So it is kind of a two-way street. I see what you mean. There's a marketing aspect to it. So it's definitely a two-way street. And that's the difference between evangelist and advocate, in my opinion. Okay. So a developer advocate is somebody that brings the feedback back into the group, which is something that I do with Pluralsight also. So they'll bring in problems from the community instead of problems from yourself. So developers will say, hey, I really hate it when I hit your API and it does this, or, why do you guys set this up? This is stupid. And then you take that feedback, take it back to the group and say, okay, this is what developers are saying. And then there's another part of it where you're taking things from the company and giving it to developers and saying, hey, look, here's some new features that we have, or here's something cool we have, or check out what we've done with our API. And so it's very much a two-way street. And I think folks starting out in DevRel like me, you have to find out how to balance that and how to make that work. And that's the process I'm in right now, is trying to figure out how to take feedback from developers, give it to Pluralsight, and then take things from Pluralsight and give them to developers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. And then for the types of content that you put out for your audiences, what are you seeing that's kind of really working or performing better for the developer audiences?
For us right now, our articles seem to be working very well. Just the good old-fashioned articles. And then webinars and panels seem to be very successful. So one of the things that I've done quite a bit of is we'll grab some experts out of the field, usually 2 or 3 people, and then I'll be the host. And we'll just kind of, I do that problem-based thing with that, is I'll come up with questions based on problems that I think that these folks will have the answer to. And those have been really successful for us, in that, a lot of people will tune in and they'll be like, okay, Julie Lerman is the world's top expert on entity framework. I want to see what she has to say, and then I'm over here like, okay, I need some questions that she hasn't been asked 1,000 times. I need some questions that I think folks are going to ask, and we put that together, and then it ends up just kind of being like this, just talking informally, hanging out. But I have a structure on the side, that and they're aware of that. Like I send the questions and things like that. So there's a structure on the side where I'm trying to shape the structure of the conversation, but it's a free flowing conversation, and those have done really well for us, especially towards the end with the questions. We get a lot of questions. We generally get way more than the guests can answer in the 5 or 10 minutes, but we intentionally, log those questions, get the answers, and then send them to them via email or whatever. And so those have been our most successful things right now, I would say, and webinars, believe it or not. A lot of folks still really enjoy webinars. And if you listen to some of the social media marketing folks, which I do, I go out and I read that kind of stuff. They're like, webinars are dead. They've been dead for years. Nobody watches webinars, but a lot of people watch our webinars and enjoy it. So we still do it.
And what type of webinars would you say that, obviously there's different styles. Some of them are really good at putting people to sleep, but what's kind of like your formula for your webinars where you got more questions than you even know what to do
with? So with our webinars, generally they're pretty traditional. So they're not put you to sleep, hopefully not put you to sleep, but it's generally slide driven and talking type of things. But one of the things that I try to do to make it interesting is just go and look at other webinars. And so I'm giving away a lot of secret sauce here, but that's all right, because I figure
that's what we want to hear.
Yeah, that's why I figure people are probably tuned in for that secret sauce. One of the things I do is I go and look for other webinars on that subject, and I look at their points, and sometimes I'll watch them or watch parts of them, and then I just try to find something that isn't included in all of those, so that we start from that point being more interesting. Like my most recent one was like experiment driven kind of I can't even remember the name now. I spent like a month building this, but but just basically like an experiment driven structure. And so what I did is like I looked at it, I'm like, okay, everybody talks about this, this, and this. I'm going to talk about something that's non-technical. I brought in Henry Ford, the Toyota Motor Company in the 1940s, all of these different things that I know. Everybody has talked about this tech company. Everyone's talked about Amazon when they talk about building a culture of experimentation. Everyone talks about Netflix and all this. So I'm like, I'm going to go back all the way back to where people were doing these things way before computers came along. And it ended up being fairly successful, I think, based on that. So we're very determined to not put people to sleep with our webinars. And they go anywhere from super technical to kind of abstract type things, depending on whether it's, if we're talking about something that's extremely technical, like Java, the new changes in Java 17, we're going to get very technical with things. Or if we're talking about DevOps and how DevOps works in 2021, that could be a lot more abstract and pulled back. So we do kind of a combination.
And you're also doing some podcasting as well?
Yeah. So I'm the host of the All Hands on Tech podcast, and that's probably one of the most fun parts of my job. Though I haven't been able to interview anyone in a little while, just based on schedules and the way things are going. But that is, probably one of the more fun parts of my job, where I will go out and find people in the industry, and it's the same kind of thing. I try to figure out what it is that people would want to know from them or hear about from them. And one of the things that I've done with the podcast is my own personal thing is I like to try to make it about the person that I'm talking to rather than the tech, because I know that, if John Papa has come up onto a podcast, everyone's going to ask him about all of the things Angular, for instance, or just any of these people. So what I try to do is I will I will definitely ask questions around that technology for those folks that want to hear it, but I also try to ask them about themselves personally, like, how did you get started in tech? What do you do when you run into a problem? Um, like, and sometimes that kind of catches people off guard, but most of the time they're like, yeah, this is cool. I'll talk about me. And like, what are your hobbies? What do you do when you're not writing Angular? Things like that. And I try to make it about the person. And so far it's been really good. I mean, people really like it. I really like doing it. I would highly suggest anybody who is looking to become a DevRel, if they don't have a podcast at that company, then have them start a podcast.
Yeah, I think what really kind of almost fries people's brains and being at other companies is that, generally they're like with developers, it's got to be very visual. Like anything where they're just listening to audio can't work. But then when I talk to other like engineers and developers, like this one person, I believe Dave EEV blog has a really famous the Amp Hour podcast, and so many people are listening to it. They're like, wow, this audience actually listens to podcasts. And so that's almost like a bit crazier people, like where developers are listening to these other ones and they're getting technical, but you're also like where the constraints of it are kind of interesting, right? You can't like always visually see something. There's like it's a YouTube show that also flips to audio, but there's others that are just audio. So it's such an interesting, that the eat it up, and then but B, also knowing like what to put on the menu so that they do eat it up.
Yeah, then that's been one of the biggest challenges, is you can't get too technical because people are trying to envision things in their head, but at the same time there are a lot of things that you can cover and a lot of points you can cover with podcasts. And I listen to podcasts myself quite a bit, and I found sometimes if they're too technical, I actually tune out of it because I'm like, I have to see this. You can talk about all of this stuff and putting together this scalable database, and yeah, that's great, but I can't see anything, so I'll skip to the next one. And then they will talk about something like developer culture and ways to help teams get along better or something, and I'm like, okay, cool, I'm all right, I'm here, I'm listening, or something like that. So yeah, it's a challenging. If you would have asked me like 5 or 10 years ago if developers would listen to podcasts, I probably would have said, no, that's not going to be our thing. But it is.
Yeah. Parts of the customer journey, either something's compiling or they're like, basically you're trying to solve a problem. And so you've got other creative outlets that you can kind of tune into. So sometimes, people I know will just listen to the podcast, hearing those things. They're like, now I know like exactly where to go in and do something, or just learning something different in parallel. So it's interesting all the different ways for sure.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the downsides actually is, so generally when I listen to podcasts or when I'm driving in my car alone or I'm at the gym or something, and there are times that I'll hear something in a podcast, I'm like, I need a pen and paper or something, or I'll grab my, like, I've got to write this down. I've been worried about this for forever. And, nobody goes to a podcast to look something up, right? You're not like, I can't connect to the database, I better find a podcast to see. They go Google, Stack Overflow, whatever. Right. But the podcast is a little more leading, it gives you things ahead of time before you need them sometimes. So it's pretty cool.
And then hopefully that also, we had that question in chat from me. And then also like, since you started doing it, are you seeing like you're starting to build that audience up, or is the returns on that looking pretty good?
Yeah, it's looking really good. And so Erica asked, what is your experience with podcasts? I'd never been on a podcast before, just a listener. And one of the things that when I first started at Pluralsight, they're like, they said, throw any ideas you can at us. We'll chew on them all. We'll throw some out. We'll keep some. Just start throwing ideas. And so that was one of my ideas. I said, how about a podcast for tech people? And then it was instantly like embraced, like, yes, we need to do that. I'm like, cool, you'll be able to find somebody that's, has really animated personality and a great voice and production skills. And then they were like, oh, you're going to host it. It's your idea. Wow. So I'm like, okay, cool, let's do it. So I worked with another person at Pluralsight, and him and I basically figured out what we needed to figure out. We didn't really know much about it. We didn't know how to publish things out, and so we just kind of winged it and learned a lot and got beat up. And we were all pretty surprised when we saw, like, oh, there's thousands of people downloaded this week.
Wow.
Wow, cool. So yeah, our subscriber base has been growing. It definitely grew during COVID when everything got shut down, which I think everybody's podcast probably across the board increased a lot. Ours increased a lot from that. It's slowed down just a little bit recently, and I think that's probably just more folks going outside, but it hasn't slowed down drastically. And it's still growing, month over month. So people are really enjoying it.
Yeah, it's great. And so it's a great lesson for anyone that watches the video in the future or here with us now, is like, you too can be a podcaster.
Oh yeah,
and doing it. So
yeah, it's not as hard as it sounds. You basically, what I do is I just kind of come up again with a set of questions. Here's the intro of what I want it to look like. Here's the middle. Here's the end, and then just kind of wing it. And if you like talking with people, or you just like tech in general, I think pretty much anybody could be a great podcast host.
yeah,
so
and
I would encourage that.
I think that's great. And just kind of like where, even sometimes where I've done it, like where you did like some experiments where you knew it wasn't going to be recorded, just to kind of like with some of the people at the company that weren't familiar, just to get them through the paces. Because at a lot of companies, the first thing you get from the marketing teams are scripts. So they're like, here's your script for the podcast. And you're like, wait a minute, I can't be like doing a podcast like I'm reading a teleprompter. But it's like people are going to bail in the first few seconds.
Yeah, definitely. And thankfully, nobody at Pluralsight has suggested or demanded that I do that. So I built my own scripts, but
wow.
Reading from a script. So I did a couple of them, like a history of Java, history of JavaScript, history of Python. And so what I did with those is I wrote it out like I would a big article. I wrote out 5,000 words or whatever. And then, to prevent myself from sounding like I'm reading off a script, I deleted pretty much everything except for the key talking points and then started talking. I wouldn't recommend this method because it's not easy, but it does feel a little bit more natural instead of just reading, over and over. Basically, I wrote it all out, send it to the team, all our feedback, and got it kind of shaped up. And then I'm like, okay, now I'm going to jump off the script and talk as much as I can. So it would be kind of like scripting this interview. Eventually people would be like, nope, we're out. That's a prepared question and a prepared answer, and they're reading a teleprompter.
You can always tell when people switch into that. It's almost like when they're talking about a sponsor. And today, our sponsor, Commodore 64, bringing you the personal computer that you always, and then it's like, okay, it's just going to be an infomercial and I'm out. But yeah, so it looks like a lot of people don't be afraid to experiment with that. You can be the host. Sometimes you don't always have like the host that's always there, but I think Jeremy showed a great way that any of us can do it and not be afraid to fail, but also being dialed into the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't be afraid to be terrible, which is the advice Scott Hanselman gave to me. Don't be afraid to be terrible. My first podcast, the very first one I did, was with Scott Allen, who unfortunately isn't with us anymore. And he was like one of my heroes, basically, because I'd taken all of his courses, and he was one of the people that I'm like, okay, if this guy can write courses, I can write courses, because he wasn't flamboyant, he wasn't egotistical, just very down to earth. So I'm like, if this guy can pull it off, I can pull it off. And so when I finally got to meet him in person, we had lunch together and it was all really cool. And I told him about the podcast, and he's like, I'll do it. He's like, let's just schedule a time, I'll do it. So my very first podcast was with him, and it was probably kind of terrible, and I had no idea what I was doing, but it was okay. Like, we kept on. And so, that would definitely be my advice to everybody, is don't be afraid to be terrible. All I did was turn on the microphone, connected in Zoom, started talking, and yeah, there's some things I would do now that I didn't do back then, but
I think the thing you kind of like touched on is even like sometimes where you think that they're bad, but then other people's like the conversation stories y'all had were so authentic, right? So it didn't feel like
yeah.
I was where people were trying to market to me or this, that, or the other, like real authentic, your voices and what you're talking about so authentic that even though whatever talked about A, B, or C, it's like you did a great job and you're like, oh wow. So just being authentic to yourself and to these stories and that little bit of like peek behind the curtains or whatever you're doing is like gold, and you're like almost too self-critical at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we've been really focused on since the beginning on the podcast is some of my leadership, when I spoke with them about setting it up, all of them kind of said the same thing. They're like, do not make this a sales pitch. And it's kind of a funny thing to hear from marketing folks, but every single leader that I talked to when I started saying, this is what we're planning, this is what we're doing, every single one of them said, do not make this a sales pitch. Do not go on to Pluralsight and start talking about how many courses we have and all these new features we have and fill up the podcast with that. They were like, just make it about, as if it were the Jeremy Morgan podcast or whatever. Like you have nothing to sell, you have nothing to push, just make it about the person and about the technology. And so I'm really thankful that I had that advice early on, because I don't think we would even be doing the podcast right now if we had tried to make it a big sales pitch to bring people into Pluralsight. I think by now we would have no listeners, I guess. So I was really thankful to get that advice where they were like, make it about the tech, make it about the person, no sales pitch. So
Yeah, and I think that's such great advice. And one thing I do when people do come in with the more sales marketing on that is just say, okay, we're definitely going to do it that way, but let's just do a quick dry run. And
yeah,
by dry run, I mean, like we know like this is ultimately going to be it, but then that way we can just do it and then do the other one knowing like we'll never use it, but instead of like all that red tape, we just do it that way.
yeah, that's actually a good idea.
Yeah, it's kind of just a hack, especially when you don't have much time, because sometimes getting the guests, the hardest part that people don't see, like scheduling it, you might have somebody for 20 minutes or like hardly any time. So there's really no time. And then at the last minute, somebody pulls the scripts out. That's pretty much, you got to wing it and stuff like that. And then just two more questions before we really flip it over to the audience. And so the two questions are going to be, we'll start with the first one. We talked about a lot with what you should do working around in DevRel roles and developer audiences, but what are like maybe like one or two or three things that like DevRel teams should definitely not be doing? What are some of these best practices that they should completely avoid?
All right. I would say one of the very number one things for me is don't punch down or bash people or technologies. I think, and it's easy to do, and I will fully admit, as a developer, I have run around the data center ranting about something, like this technology sucks so bad. I cannot believe that people released this and thought that this was going to work. This is terrible. I think when developer relations folks do that, I think it puts the company that you're representing, it puts them into a compromise, right? Like if you go on and start just rattling on about how terrible this company is, and that company has a partnership with your company, it's pretty easy to see where that's going to go. You're probably not going to be a developer relations person there very long, but more importantly, you just don't want to break down relationships to try to build smaller relationships. So if I go on and start talking about Oracle and how terrible it is, there are going to be people that are going to relate to me and be like, yes, I hate them too, or whatever. But there's going to be a much larger effect in that you're breaking down that relationship with that company. You might be on their radar. I mean, every company out there looks and sees what people are saying. And it just doesn't offer a lot of value, to say this is terrible. Now, it's okay to say this is something that I don't like. This is something I struggle with. Or, I could say, well, this view pattern is so much better about how they handle the view model, and Angular is just terrible. You could say that as kind of a comparison, but then follow up with why. But I would say the number one is just don't bash people and don't punch down, don't start talking trash about your competitors. Just be really careful about the negativity that you put out and what you're expecting to get back from that negativity. Do you just want that echo chamber where everybody's clapping for you? That's not really what your job is, and it's not producing anything good. So say the number one rule, don't bash or be overly negative. I would say number two is probably to listen. If you don't listen, you're not going to do well. So if I'd say something that you don't want to do as a DevRel is don't just ignore people and say, well, they don't know what they're talking about, they're stupid. If you see something twice, there's probably something there. And there's always, we all go on to Yelp and different review sites, and we always know there's that one person, right? That one person that's never satisfied, that finds fault in everything. Those people exist. And so, but if you start seeing a bunch of those people, then it's probably not them. Like, you probably have a genuine problem, and they're trying to tell you for free that you have this problem, and you should listen to that. So that's something that you have to balance. I still am working with that and learning from that all the time. I'll hear feedback and I try to give value to every bit of feedback that I get. Even if I'm like, well, yes, they probably just don't understand how this particular thing works. Maybe I'll try to explain it, but I never want to be like, no, you're full of it. I don't care. Bye, delete. That's something I could see where people can get into a lot of trouble with this. So that's two. The third thing is probably just be yourself. Don't try to chase fame for developer relations. So one of the things I think that draws people in from developer relations is they see it like influencers, right? So like people on Instagram or Twitter or all these, they're famous and, oh, look at all the cameras flashing and yay, and you get to go up on stage in tech conferences and yay, I'm a big superstar. It doesn't really feel like that. And it's not really the thing that you want. I would say. So just being yourself. I'm a fairly quiet guy, pretty low key, and people tend to like it, I guess. So I'm going to go with it. I feel like if I wanted to increase my tech fame or increase notoriety, I could pick things up and I could be like, smash that like button, yeah, and just be hyper. But then I'm going to meet people in real life who are like, who is this guy? Like, what, it's fake. So just being yourself to just chase fame, because there isn't that much fame. I don't have a limousine parked out front. I don't have a personal helicopter. I go out to the grocery store and nobody takes pictures of me. So, and I like that, but it's kind of one of those things that I think certain folks might have a different view of how developer relations works. And if you're focusing on building like influencer fame, that type of thing, I don't think you're going to give enough to your audience for them to care. Where it's, if your primary goal is I'm going to go teach people things and you focus on that, your follower counts are going to go up. You are going to get more known, but you're going to be known for somebody that's helping people learn more than anything. If you want to be an Instagram influencer, there are easier ways to do it than getting into DevRel. So.
Great. I love those 3 points. So number one, don't bash. Number two, listen. Number three, be yourself and don't chase fame. So those are all 3 great points. And then the last question, just so that we capture it here today, is like the one interesting part of your career when we look at it, and I believe it started in 2009, is then suddenly you're a volunteer firefighter, as if you don't have enough things going on.
Yeah.
About and talk us through that.
Yeah, so that one is a little bit of a red herring that people don't really expect. So a lot of people don't know that across the country, 80% of or firefighters or volunteers.
Hmm.
So that's with the exception, like you live in Raleigh, it's a big population center. They're going to have full-time men and women, in the station full-time all the time. But as soon as you start to go out of the towns, what you'll generally have is one or two paid people and then two other people who will show up. So talking about like a 4-person crew on a fire engine. So a lot of people don't know that, when you go outside the city centers and you see firefighters working on scene, they're going to be either paid firefighters or there'll be a volunteer who is doing it so that they can get experience before becoming a paid firefighter, or they're an intern who's going to school for it, or they're just somebody that does it to contribute to the community. And I think it surprises a lot of people. And in our area, in our county, there's probably about 75% volunteer. And in my town, particularly, we have 4 fire stations across 3 different cities. And most of our response out here is volunteer. So in the middle of the night, myself and my wife will get up, pager will go off, we'll get up, we'll run down there. Somebody else will show up with us usually. We grab the fire truck and we go and we, pick someone up off the floor in the middle of the night, or we go work a car accident. And it kind of blows people's minds sometimes that a lot of tens of thousands of people do this all over the country. And it's something that my family was involved in quite a bit. I have a ton of family who are paid and volunteer firefighters. And I finally decided to get into it at their coaxing. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it, and went through and got trained up. And then what's really interesting is, so my wife, for years and years, I was, full combat, what they call full combat firefighter, which means you do everything. And you have to maintain the same certifications as paid people. So it's that's one of the reasons that it's declining, is our training is going up and our time is not. But so I was full combat, and she's like, I really want to be involved. She was used to like pager going off, I'd buzz out of the house, and she's like, I want to be involved. So she got involved in support firefighting, which is, with support, they do things like check blood pressure, make sure that the firefighters are okay, bring them water, change out clothes, wash, things like that. She got into that for a couple of years, and then she's like, I want to do full combat. Like, I want to be in it. So she went and took the PAT, which are physical abilities test. And the first time she didn't pass it. We went back, we worked, struggled. Second time, didn't pass it. Third time, she passed it with 3 minutes to go. So basically, it was basically just, kind of conditioning and working, and then she interviewed and became a full combat firefighter and got through her probationary period faster than anyone I've ever seen at the department. So it's pretty cool. So it's definitely one of those things I like to do to help people. I don't ever want to be a paid firefighter or do that for a living, but I really enjoy the helping people part of it, and which probably surprises nobody, but I really like to teach younger firefighters, especially ones that are just out of school. They're going into college for firefighting. There's a whole bunch of things that I can teach them, like, hey, you need to focus on learning this and this. And yeah, it's really enjoyable. Highly recommend it to anyone that's interested.
You're literally out there not only helping people and developers, but also in your own area, like saving lives and saving pets and probably other stuff. So that's amazing.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff applies to tech, believe it or not. Like the blameless post-mortem that we talk about in tech, where you get together after a big incident and you talk about what went wrong and what you can change and all that. The fire service has been doing that for years and years and years, things like that. Different decision making strategies. There's a lot of stuff that I've actually taken from the fire service into tech, believe it or not. So
wow, that's just truly remarkable. And you kind of a family affair. So in addition to the day job, having this where your pager goes off at crazy hours, and then but also funneling that back into your business and other stuff. So that's really amazing.
Yeah, been a lot of fun.
Awesome. And then, so we're just here with a few minutes left, but if anyone wants to come up on stage or just put a question into chat. We'll turn it over to a question and answer, but this is really, as we flip it over to the Q&A part, this has really been a great talk, and just I think everyone here has probably learned a lot that they can take back into their own DevRel roles and business roles as well. So anyone want to ask a question or get up here on stage? And Erica, right out of the gate, how do you implement DEI in your events?
Okay, so it's the diversity initiatives?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is one of the things where we shine, and so I'm very proud to talk about this. So we have our leadership really encourages diversity in speaking, not just events, but pretty much anything we do. And we've had rules like Pluralsight Live. I've worked on Pluralsight Live in 2019 and 2020. And both of those, there was a 50-50 goal. So we want 50% women, 50% men, people of color. Like there's just kind of a goal there that's set, that we don't want everybody who looks the same. We don't want one big just mass of white guys. And I could say that because I am one. We don't want just massive middle-aged white guys running the whole show. And what you'll find is when you start really going out and looking and finding, there are just tons of incredible people who look entirely different from each other. And when you have someone in leadership saying, we want you to do this, we want you to find these people, and then you go out and you start looking for these people, you will find them. You'll find just brilliant, awesome, smart, everything type of people if you go out and look for them. And so the entire time that I've been at Pluralsight, that's been a mission to find these other voices. And I've talked with some just amazing people as a result of that. As I'm going out and reaching out and bringing people in, we've talked with some amazing people. And so yeah, my advice for that, actually I just recently received this advice from Scott Hanselman again, who said, if you're ever looking for some different faces to talk about in tech, he goes, go to my podcast, go to the Hansel Minute podcast and take a look. And he's got hundreds and hundreds of people that he's talked to who are amazing. If you listen to the podcast, they're amazing people. So if you ever find yourself in that position where you're like, I just can't find, anybody other than this group that we've always been talking with, go check out that Hansel Minutes podcast, because there's a very large and diverse group of amazing people. So yeah, the way we implement it is we just say, this is the goal. We need to meet this goal. We band together. We throw each other Slack messages. Have you talked to this person? Have you talked to this person? Have you talked to this person? And yeah, I would highly recommend it, because if you're, and Cassidy Williams is my co-host last week with Tech Skills Day. She said, if you don't have diverse people working on your product or your presentation, you're not going to reach a diverse audience. She said it much more eloquently than I just did, but it really stuck with me. That she's saying, if you want to reach everybody and you want to have this broad appeal, then you need to include everybody in what you're making and what you're building. So I would, yeah, highly recommend pursuing that. Oh, great. Hello, Maureen.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Friends that I brought in here.
Yeah. Do we have anyone who wants to join us on stage here for a few minutes as we wrap up? I know we got Jay, we got Ilker out of Turkey, we got Hayata out of snowy Chicago, we've got Erica. Anybody want to join the stage, or just get the happy face? All right. We'll just throw people on the stage whether they want to or not. How about that? We'll just cross some bills.
Add all. Is there an add all button?
I don't know. Jay will have to tell me if there is one. Let's see. There we go. So I flipped some of the people on. If anyone wants to join, if I missed you, let me know. But you can come up here. Just wrapping it up. This is a low-key way. I put in the chat as well, all the ways you can connect with Jeremy. Be sure to reach out to him. And then I know Ilker or some of the others, you make a great podcast guest for what he's doing. So I guess everyone's shy today. I'm not seeing the presentation. Oh, hey, there's Ilker out of Turkey. He's like, hey, wait a minute, who put me on stage? Hey.
Hello. Yes. I'm always, I'm a bit of a attention hog in that context, so no problems with that. So, Jeremy, that was awesome. Thanks. I missed a little bit of it. There was a phone call that arrived. It's what about 6 minutes to 9 p.m. in Turkey, so it's an evening chat for us. And it's absolutely great. And at Pluralsight, you guys are doing some amazing things. I used to work at Google, and I know that you're supporting a lot of communities over there with free access, especially on cloud side. So I've heard some great stuff. And I just wanted to say thanks. Obviously, Blake always puts on a great show on DevRel. We think it's a jewel that is undiscovered. So I just wanted to come up and say hi.
Well, hi. It's very nice to meet you.
Yes, that's fantastic.
Very cool. Thanks for staying up late to watch it. So that was pretty
thanks,
cool.
Blake.
Yeah, thank
you, Blake.
Yeah, we got someone out of Turkey. We had Erica is out of looks like there she is. I think Erica is out of Mexico City, right?
Hi, how are you guys?
Hey,
very well. How are you?
I actually have one question for you, Jeremy. It is, how do you measure the success of your community?
That's a great question.
I'm actually struggling with that. I'm trying to build a developer community where I'm working, so I'm trying to figure out how to not have vanity measurements.
Yeah, so we are struggling with that right now as well, because this is a brand new program. We definitely are going to have to at some point say we have impacted in this way. Right now, what we're doing is like very old-fashioned. Like, how many article views are we getting? Are the article views going up? How many podcast listens are we getting? Are those going up? YouTube video views, and we're kind of looking at those metrics, and we're hoping that we're starting at a point right now to where next year we can look at it and say we grew this many followers on Twitch or this many views. But yeah, honestly, I wish I had a better answer other than we're still figuring that out right now. We're still, I mean, we know if we do it wrong, yeah. If we do it wrong, we'll know for sure. But if we do it right, I'm not sure how to measure that yet, but we're still figuring it out.
Thanks for your honesty.
Yeah, no problem. So are either of you in developer relations?
I'm not developer relations. I'm actually community and developer relations at Terminal.io. We bring global opportunities to developers from Latin America mainly, and we are trying to reach more developers.
Oh, nice. I used to work with some developers from Mexico, from the big tech hub down there, and it was cool. Like, I always wanted to take a trip, but I never got to take a trip down there. But there was this huge tech hub and stuff, and I was always like, hey, is there any reason I should go down there? Can I go down? And every time they're like, no, you can talk with them on the phone, and they would come up here, but you can't go down there. But there's some interesting tech going on in Mexico for sure.
Yeah, of course, especially in Guadalajara and Mexico City. Those are like the biggest cities.
Big, huge tech hubs down there.
Yeah, there's a lot of developer, let's say, prominence in some really cool parts of the world. Yeah, Mexico and Latin America is one of them. Of course, Eastern Europe and the former Russian countries, they are very, very strong, really strong in that context. And as for myself, I was also, because I think you've asked the question to both of us in a way. So I used to manage Google's developer communities in Turkey, Central Asia, and Caucasus. 10 countries, 50,000 developers, which is not bad globally, because we have, there used to be about over 1 million members of GDGs around the world. So Turkey is pretty strong.
Wow.
And of course, Central Asia is also, following suit. You know what? Places like even Afghanistan was one of our countries, and they were very, very strong. So, in sometimes it's seemingly, people just think that it's not, a hotspot, but developers or software development could be an interesting way for people to move on to the next stage in their lives as a society, as professional developers. I found that very interesting, and anybody that can actually who can actually access a computer and a programming platform, they're a developer. So hey presto, we go that way.
Yeah, I love it when I hear from people on social media from other parts of the world that are like, yeah, we're doing all this tech stuff and it's so fun and it's great. It's like it's spreading worldwide. I love tech so much. It's such a huge part of my life that I just love seeing it spread everywhere. And again, it comes back to that diversity of ideas, right? You have somebody that grew up in Africa with a certain culture in a certain way. They're not going to approach the same problem as I did growing up in the country in the United States, in a rural area in the United States. We're not going to approach a problem the same way. And, one of us is going to come up with an idea that the other person didn't. So I think it's great for technology. The more places it spreads and the more people get into it, the better it is for everyone in the world. So it's very cool.
Ilker, I didn't meet you at a Google event, but I'm also part of the GDG community. Nice. I used to be the leader of GDG Cloud MX.
Fantastic! It's great, and this is a very interesting thing that binds us all, because the community, especially developer communities. What happened was recently. So this might already touch a few points that was already raised. So I ran a small presentation called "Why Should You Join a Developer Community?" And then I start talking about the story of open source, and of course how being a software developer or developer of any sort is actually a very, very interesting and unique profession, because it is entirely based on collaboration. Funnily enough, you don't have professions such as sales and project management and product management even that it has a strong vein of collaboration. I'm just saying this as a general rule. Obviously, there are exceptions. But being a developer, it just means that asking questions and helping each other and so forth. And I found out that by and large, the recruitment industry is still trying to get to grips with that. So that's why I think it's important to understand the power of DevRel all around the world, really. And now that was a question that came to my mind, actually, as Erica was asking her question about the new models of working and new models of management. So there's this thing in Turkey right now, and I'm sure it is in Mexico, because the borders are now down with COVID and everything. I'm saying this in a good way. There's a lot of work now that is being directed to developers in Turkey, and I'm sure the same goes for Mexico, because now the talent is global, the outreach is global, and funnily enough, now we're talking about this. Pluralsight is right in the middle of it, because it's an education platform. So, what's your take in the future of companies, Jeremy? Do you think the developers are going to be sort of these sort of remote islands where they just float from project to project? Or whether we're going to have sort of new ways of organizations, such as holacracies, where you have zero hierarchy. What do you think is the future going to be?
So I usually don't like giving out predictions, but I think the way I see it is I see barriers falling every day. We all see that. And one of the things that I really like about open source software is that things come in as a pull request, and we're looking at the code in that pull request, and we're looking at what it does. We're not looking at the person, right? So this could be somebody with 30 years of experience who has a doctorate from Stanford, or it could be a high school kid sitting in Afghanistan who saw a problem and solved it. Nobody cares because they're looking at a pull request. And what that does is it starts to tear down the walls. And I think by going remote, you know, everybody's remote and everybody's kind of spread apart. I don't think that's going to last forever, but I think being able to work and do things from different parts of the world, like, do you really care where your pull requests are coming from? Do you really care, you know, whether or not that person is sitting in an office next to you with open windows, or do you care about, you know, you're all working together building a cool project? And so I think it's just breaking down barriers, which can only be a good thing. I mean, that's what Pluralsight's all about, right? We democratize tech skills. We say that all the time. And just by breaking down barriers and making it easier for people to contribute, easier for people to work, you know, if I were running a software team today, would I hire somebody from Afghanistan if I could that does a great job? Sure, absolutely. And with these advances that we're seeing in communications and source control systems, it's making that possible. And I think it can only be a good thing. I think it's going to break down barriers, and it's going to make more people want to stand up and get into tech. And they're going to bring diverse views and different ways of problem solving that we all win. So I know that's kind of a general answer to your question, but I think we're going to see the barriers break down. I think we're going to see a lot less of you need to fit this particular mold in order to work here and work on this project. And it's going to be more based on what type of code are you sending, what types of problems are you solving, how are you solving them. And that's a good thing, I think.
Thanks very much for that.
All right, that's great. And then, so we're kind of a little bit over here, so I don't know if anyone has any other meetings, but this Fireside chat, it was great having you all on stage. It was so great to have Jeremy up, just a master of so many different things, and gave us so many great talking points. And what was the mantra you started us off with again? It was about, you had like a specific kind of slogan. What was that?
I don't even remember.
Like to make developers' lives easier, or something.
Oh, make developers' lives easier.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's what I usually say. Yeah. Like, I'm Jeremy Morgan. I make developers better at their jobs. So
there we go. Yeah,
that's been my mission for the last couple of years. I've tried to really stick to that mission. Like, am I helping somebody become better at what they do? If not, then maybe I shouldn't be doing it. So. Yeah, sorry about that. I totally forgot.
No worries. I know it's like Chris, there's some people that can repeat like every single word back verbatim, like in the recap, stuff like that. I'm not
one of those people.
Yeah, I'll get there. Yeah. But such an awesome chat today, I think, for Ilker, Erica, everybody else. Hopefully this was like really good hearing from not only someone doing a DevRel role, but it's actually been on the developer side, volunteer firefighter, a lot of different things, all the way out of Oregon, and just doing some amazing things at Pluralsight. Don't forget to connect with them on LinkedIn, other stuff. Maybe there's some podcast synergy or other types of synergy with you. So yeah, I'm sure Jeremy would love to hear from you all. And then I'll let Jeremy, any sort of final closing comments or remarks on your side.
I'd say just in closing, if DevRel is something that you're pursuing, just remember that many of us have no idea what we're doing. So don't assume that, because I made that same assumption myself, actually, like, as I started looking into it, I'm like, all of these people have it all figured out, so I better get it figured out. It's a very evolving and new thing, and you're going to find things that work for you. You're going to find things that don't work for you. You're going to be able to find other people to learn from. There are a lot of people that are doing DevRel out there really well. Blake, you're one of those people that I consider doing developer relations very well. So there are people out there doing it very well that you can learn from, but don't be afraid that you don't know what you're doing and you're lost, and you should just give up on it. If it's something you really want to do, pursue it and figure it out. So.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Jeremy Morgan. Pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining our CMX Connect with a global audience, making developers' lives easier and breaking down barriers with Turkey, Mexico, and all over. So Really
yeah,
great
love it.
Wednesday. Hope everybody enjoyed it, and look forward to the next time, and see y'all later.
See you. Thank you.